Hello everyone, welcome to episode 48 of Silva's cocktail course. During the last couple of videos I presented a plethora of cocktail recipes to you, but my series is called Cocktail Course and I came to the conclusion that the course aspect fell a little bit short recently, so I decided to change that and add a little bit more videos with theory and techniques about cocktail making in general. I will have a little bit more videos about the materials and tools you work with, the ingredients, and want to add a little bit more knowledge to my videos about cocktail making. And I will start with that today with a video about the different techniques for mixing cocktails. And so let's start with it. In general, there are 5 basic techniques for mixing cocktails. The build up in the guest glass. Then we have stirring in the stirring glass, of course shaking in the cocktail shaker. And then we also have mixing with the electric mixer and blending with the electric blender. I will go into more details for each of those techniques in a few moments, but first I have to add that depending on where you look, you will find also different categorizations for the basic techniques. For example, there's also this one here, which adds for the shaking also the speed shaking technique, and for mixing and blending the so-called dry techniques, which means the techniques without ice, and sometimes you'll also find a category for hot drinks. I will not talk about those 4 extra techniques in this video because they are either covered with one of the basic 5 techniques or they require special equipment and are therefore not relevant for non-professional bartenders. Some of them are not even relevant for professionals that much, so I will stick to the basic 5 and talk about them in a little bit more detail now. Let's start with the mixing, because this technique, although one of the basic 5, is not so relevant for non-professional bartenders as well. Even for professionals it's not that interesting, just because this very special technique requires the aid of an electric mixer, and most bartenders prefer to create their cocktails with manual techniques like shaking or stirring. That means that this technique is limited to a few very rare cases, for example hardly mixable ingredients which have to be mixed using more force than you have with shaking, or if you want to prepare large quantities of a drink which do not fit into a regular shaker. Apart from these 2 scenarios, most bartenders that I know try to avoid the electric mixing as good as possible and rely on manual techniques instead. So for the non-professional bartender, this is a really irrelevant technique. So let's go on with something that is of more relevance. Let's start with building the drink in the guest glass. As the name suggests, this technique means that the drink is created or built up in the glass from which the guest will eventually drink this beverage. For this technique there are several use case scenarios in which it is used. The first one, you have ingredients you do not want to completely mix. For example, if you want to create some color gradients or colored layers. You can see the creation of my lava colada drink here as an example, or the B52 shot, which has 3 ingredients and 3 differently colored layers. The second case in which this technique is used is when carbonated ingredients are involved. Most likely it is then used in combination with some other technique, which means the carbonated ingredient, soda water, lemonade or whatsoever, is added after all the other ingredients and then stirred lightly. This light stir is the difference to stirring in the stirring glass, to which we come in a moment. A combination of those 2 is the floating of ingredients, which means that ingredients are added after all the other ingredients. For example, the grenadine syrup, which is added to a tequila sunrise and creates that color gradient at the bottom of the glass. But also the floating of highly alcoholic spirits on top of a drink is in that category. Also here it is used in combination with other techniques. Last but not least, we have cocktails which require special preparation techniques directly in the guest glass. For example, the caipirinha cocktail, for which limes are muddled in the guest glass and then served Let's go to the other end of the spectrum for the next technique, which is the electric blending of cocktails. That involves, of course, an electric blender, and it has a lot of force too, but the main point for this one is to grind solid ingredients within the drink, for example ice cubes or fruits, to create frozen drinks or similar beverages. So now we come to those two techniques used for the majority of all cocktail recipes, which is stirring in the stirring glass or shaking in the cocktail shaker. Both have a very similar basic idea behind them, but they also have some slight differences which should be considered when using those two techniques. Generally spoken, you can shake every drink that should be stirred, but not the other way around because of those slight differences. I will come to them in a few moments. Let's start with the shaking because it is the most commonly used technique and also the most recognized of those two. I've used this technique a lot, so I don't have to say much about it. All the ingredients are added into the shaker with some ice, then it is closed and shaken for about 10 to 15 seconds until water starts condensating on the shaker, which is the sign that the drink is now cold enough. For the shaker itself, there are several different models. The one I used so far is the cobbler shaker. This is also the most recognized model. It's out of metal and consists of 3 parts: a shaker tin, a large cap with an integrated strainer, and a small cap to close all of this. All the ingredients go into the tin and then both caps are used to close the shaker, and after the shaking the drink is strained through the integrated strainer into the guest glass by just opening the small cap. Ironically, although this is the most recognized shaker model, it is not used so much in professional bars. Most professional bartenders prefer another shaker model, to which I come in a moment, because they can work faster with it. But there's also one huge problem of the cobbler shaker, which is the integrated strainer in the cap. It creates a lot of edges and small rims inside the shaker, which makes it hard to clean it properly without the help of a dishwasher. In a stressful bar environment, you simply don't have the time to put this shaker into a dishwasher every time you used it, but with all those edges, you cannot clean it properly when washing it by hand, so most bartenders tend to avoid this kind of shaker and use a different one, which is the Boston shaker. This shaker consists of 2 pieces, a metal shaker tin and a glass. Sometimes this glass is another smaller shaker tin, but for the most part it's glass. All the ingredients go in the glass bottom of the shaker, then the metal tin is put on top and closed tightly, and then you can shake it. As there's no integrated strainer, you'll need a separate one. We will see that in a moment in the video. Without all the edges from the integrated strainer, this one is really easy and fast to clean up in a busy bar environment when you don't have the time to put it in a dishwasher. That's why most bartenders prefer this model of shaker, and also I will use this shaker from now on in my cocktail videos. Shaking is the most powerful of the manual shaking techniques, which makes it suitable for ingredients that are hardly mixable, such as for example juices or syrups which contain a lot of sugar, or cream which contains a lot of fat. As soon as one of those 3 types of ingredients is involved in the recipe, you should always shake the cocktail. The part of the sugary ingredients also extends to some very sweet liquors. These also require shaking the cocktail. Okay, and now the last of our 5 basic techniques, stirring the drink in a stirring glass. The basic idea behind this technique is fairly simple. You put all the ingredients into a stirring glass, which is usually the glass bottom of a Boston shaker. Then you use the bar spoon to stir this drink. For that, you tuck the spoon between your fingers loosely and let it slide around the edge of the glass. The ice cubes will help with that because they press it to the edge of the glass. If you do this properly, you don't need so much force with your hand, which makes this technique rather gentle, which is quite useful if you have a lot of cocktails to stir. I must admit I'm not that good at it because I don't stir cocktails so often, so I'm not the most elegant stirrer here. As stirring does not have as much force as shaking, this technique is used for ingredients that are easily mixable, which means in most cases only spirits. Lime juice and lemon juice maybe if they are only in small quantities, but otherwise as soon as juices, syrups or cream are involved, as I said before, then shaking is always the technique of choice for those recipes. That's why we have less stirring recipes compared to the shaking recipes, but we'll find a lot of the classical recipes in this category because they consist only of spirits and stirring is the older technique compared to shaking. But I think I will go into detail about the history of cocktails in another video. The cooling effect of stirring is weaker than the one of shaking, which means that you have to stir the drink longer than you have to shake it. About 45 seconds to 1 minute is the usual amount of time needed here. So now you can ask the question, if stirring takes so much more time and time is a critical factor in a stressful bar environment, why don't all drinks use shaking instead of stirring? Especially, as I said before, all stirred drinks can also be created using shaking techniques. The reason for that lies in those slight differences I mentioned earlier. It's a little bit of physics here, which I will explain in a really fast fashion. The level of the chilling effect of the technique is only one side of the coin. The other side is the dilution of the drink from the melting water of the ice cubes. All of the cooling of the drink while shaking or stirring only comes from the melting water of the ice cubes. So those two, cooling and dilution, are intertwined. Without cooling there's no dilution, without dilution there's no cooling. The intense movements of the shaking increase the surface of the ice, which comes into contact with the drink, but also increases the surface of the drink that comes in contact with the ice, allowing it to absorb more melting water. This results in a stronger cooling effect, but also in more dilution of the drink. This effect is also increased further if you have low quality ice cubes that are shattered during shaking. Stirring, on the other side, is a rather slow technique, so the surface of the ice that comes in contact with the drink and the surface of the drink that comes in contact with the ice is much lesser than with shaking, so the dilution is less, but also the cooling effect is less. The fact that the drink takes on some of the melting water of the ice is even a desired effect, on the one hand because there is no cooling without dilution, as I said before, but the melting water is for the most recipes already considered when the recipes are created, so the dilution is already considered part of the recipe, otherwise the drink may be too strong. So apart from the ingredients, also the desired level of dilution leads to one of those two techniques. Shaking also has another effect on the drink. Due to the intense movements, air is incorporated into the liquid drink, which results in a lot of small air bubbles that start rising up in the drink as soon as it hits the glass. That means that this effect also changes the texture of the drink, but it vanishes really fast, so the drink should be served quickly after shaking it. To end this topic of shaking versus stirring, there's also one anecdote I want to share. Most of us know James Bond 007, the secret agent, and his favorite drink, the vodka martini, which he orders like this.
Can I get you something, sir?
Vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
I'm sorry, we don't serve alcohol.
That's interesting because if you shake the cocktail, the dilution is higher, so the cocktail is weaker. You could say that James Bond is a sissy because he wants a weaker version of his cocktail. So much for my little lesson about cocktail mixing techniques. In the next video I will present another recipe for sure. And until then, thank you for watching, see you in the next video if you want to, and goodbye and cheers!